So, what are human rights? It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer, well, it's actually pretty complex. Today, we're going to break it all down. We're using a massive encyclopedia as our guide to build a simple, clear way for you to understand one of the most important ideas in the world.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim, and we're starting here for a reason. This is the core problem we're going to solve today. See, for a lot of us, especially in the US, when we hear human rights, we immediately think of our own constitution, our own laws, but what if that's not the whole picture? Not even close. Let's clear up that confusion.
And here's our roadmap for how we're going to do it. First, we'll tackle that common misunderstanding head-on. Then, we'll define what we're actually talking about. After that, we'll find out where these rights are written down in a kind of global rulebook, look at the unique American story, and finally wrap it all up with why this stuff matters to every single one of us.
All right, let's dive into that common misunderstanding. Now, our guide for this is this huge, dense encyclopedia. But don't worry, we are definitely not reading the whole thing. Just think of it like a toolkit. We're just pulling out the most essential tools you need to build a really solid understanding from the ground up.
And this right here, this is the absolute core of the confusion. For so many Americans, human rights and the Bill of Rights are basically the same thing. You know, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. But what if those incredibly important rights are just one chapter in a much, much bigger global story? So, if human rights aren't just constitutional rights, what in the world are they? This next part is absolutely crucial for understanding everything else. We are going to draw a very bright, very clear line between the rights you are born with and the rights a government decides to give you.
You know, the entire massive structure of human rights is built on one simple but incredibly powerful idea: human dignity. It's this belief that every single person has worth just because, not because of what you do or who you are or where you're from, but simply because you're human. This is the bedrock. Everything else is built on this. Okay, this slide makes the difference crystal clear. Look on the left, human rights. These are inherent. You're literally born with them. They exist before any government or any law. Now look on the right, civil rights. These are granted by a government. This is a huge distinction. It means governments don't create human rights. Their job is just to recognize and protect them. It also means civil rights can be changed, they can be voted away. But human rights, in principle, they're permanent. So let's just lock in these three essential ideas because they are everything. Human rights are inherent. They're part of you, just for being you. They are universal. They belong to everybody, everywhere, no exceptions. And they are unalienable. They can't be taken away. Sure, a government might violate them, but it can never, ever truly erase them.
Okay, so that leads to a really logical question, right? If these rights exist above and beyond any single country's laws, where do you find them? Where are they actually written down? Well, welcome to the Global Rulebook.
So, the answer is you find them in two main places. The first one is pretty obvious: formal international agreements we call treaties. But there's a second and honestly more fascinating source. It's a set of unwritten rules that become law just through widespread practice, known as customary international law.
So how does a treaty even happen? It's usually a three-step dance. First, countries get together and issue a declaration. Think of this as a statement of shared goals. It's not legally binding. Next, those ideas get turned into a formal, legally binding treaty. But here's the most important step: ratification. That's the moment a country formally says, okay, we're in. We officially accept that we are legally required to follow these rules.
Now, this second source is super interesting. It's kind of like a path being worn into a field. At first, maybe people walk a certain way because it's easier, but over time, so many people use that path and they believe it's the right way to go that it basically becomes the official route. That's how a rule, like the absolute ban on torture, becomes binding on everyone, even a country that never signed a specific treaty. It happens through consistent practice and a shared belief that it's a legal obligation.
And yeah, once you start digging into the details, you run into this: a total alphabet soup of acronyms. The UDHR, the ICCPR, the ICESCR, the CAT. It can feel really overwhelming. But don't worry about memorizing them. The key takeaway is just to know that this complex system exists, and it forms the backbone of that global rulebook we were talking about.
Okay, so we've got this global system in mind. Now, let's zoom in and focus on one specific country's story, the American story. How does a nation that's so focused on its own constitution deal with this bigger international framework?
Well, the connection is right there at the very beginning of the country.
Think about the Declaration of Independence. It's not talking about rights that a king grants you. It talks about unalienable rights that people are endowed with. That's the language of inherent human rights, not civil rights. In fact, you could argue the U.S. was the first nation explicitly founded on a human rights philosophy.
But this timeline, it reveals a really deep but also really complicated relationship. In 1776, the U.S. provides the core philosophy. In 1948, it helps lead the world in building the modern system. But then you start to see this hesitation. Look at that last date. It took 15 years just to ratify a key treaty it had already signed. It shows this consistent pattern, championing human rights out on the world stage, but being really cautious about tying its own hands with international law.
And this table right here shows you exactly what that hesitation looks like in practice. This treaty covers things like the right to work, the right to healthcare, the right to education. The U.S. signed it way back in 1977, which basically says, yeah, we like this idea, but it has never, ever ratified it. It's never taken that final step to make it legally binding here at home. And that really reflects a long, ongoing debate in America about whether these kinds of economic and social issues should be treated as actual enforceable rights.
Okay, this all leads us to our final and maybe most important section, a standard for power. After all this discussion of treaties and laws, why does this global system really matter? What's the point of it all?
This is the ultimate why. Power, by its very nature, tends to want to go unchecked. International human rights law provides a universal yardstick. It's a standard of conduct that exists outside of any single government. It gives all of us, as citizens, a powerful tool to measure what our own leaders are doing and to hold them accountable to a global standard.
And in the end, it's about so much more than just legal rules. The grand purpose of all of this is stated right there in the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says that recognizing these rights, well, it's the very foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. It all comes back to that one core idea we started with, human dignity.
So we'll leave you with this final question to think about. In a world that's defined by national borders and governments, what is the true role and the real power of a set of laws that claims to stand above every nation and protect every single person? That's the central challenge and the enduring promise of the entire human rights project.